Welcome. What we're going to talk about today is resurfacing your diamond belts. Now, if you have an older belt, this one's kind of wore, that's got some frayed places at the edge. What we'll do is we'll clip these strings that are frayed, and we're going to recoat it with diamonds so it'll be cut good. In fact, once we recoat these, I've found that they actually cut better than the original ones, and they last a whole lot longer. So let's get started. Okay, first thing we're going to do is go through what you're going to need. As far as, and I'll try to do my best at keeping everything where you can see it. You're going to need a couple of things. You're going to need some epoxy 220. I find that epoxy 220 does best. It's getting a little harder for me to find it. I used to buy it in bigger containers, but as few as I do, I find that the hardener tends to, for lack of a better word, go rancid after it's set for 6 months or a year. But this is a 1 ounce set. It's two-part epoxy. Each one is a ½ an ounce. Now I'll be doing 4 belts. Now what I'm working on is 60 grit, and you'll need some synthetic diamond. It's relatively, I say, inexpensive for what it is. Now I've got, that bag is 100 carats, and I find this you can get it at techdiamondtools.com. There are some other places depending on your needs. A lot of them. Now this is actually 60-70 mesh, so it's 60-70 grit, and these green wheels here, they're actually 60 grit. Now these other ones aren't, but you can recoat an old wheel as long as you're going to a heavier grit. You don't want to go to a finer grit when you have a coarser grit wheel, because if it wears down, then you're going to end up with that coarser grit coming back out in places and causing scratches. Now these wheels, if you take a soft brush and just water, run them under water and wash whatever material might be left from when you cut. You don't want any small stone cutting material left. Wash them with it, and like I say, you trim the strings off the edge and then come back and wipe them down with denatured alcohol, and that'll give you a good bonding surface. Now normally if I'm doing, say, just one big wheel or a little one, I'll mix it up on my epoxy on a piece of glass, and I'll just use a craft stick, and you can mix it real well, and then I'll apply it. I use these little utility or acid brushes. You can pick these up at Harbor Freight, I think, is probably one of the easiest places to find them, and I'll apply it, and you'll see that. Now today, being I'm doing these 4 wheels, I'm going to mix it up in a small cup. Okay. Now if you're mixing from a big container of epoxy, you'll want to mark your cup so you get the same amount of hardener and the resin together, because they are even parts. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be mixing these whole tubes up. Now when you put diamonds on, a lot of them recommend 5 carats of diamonds for the smaller wheels, and they recommend 10 to 15 for the bigger ones, and that's kind of where I go when I'm doing finer grits like 280 or finer. I'll go that route. But being this is a coarser grit, all your diamond particles are larger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add more. In fact, I'm going to use this whole 100. Normally I would be, let's say 15, 15, 5 and 5 would be 40. But I'm going to actually over double that with this 60-70 grit so that it actually covers the wheels good. Now what we'll do, first thing is, we're going to have to mix our two parts up. What I like to do is always put the hardener in first because I like it to end up, well, I'm trying to see which one's actually hardener. Okay, that's resin. This is a hardener. I always put the hardener in first because what happens is if you have resin on the side of the cup and you don't get it mixed good, and that's what last comes out, then you don't end up with a good hard surface. So I do the hardener. The reason I use 220 instead of 230 or 330 is because any of your 5-minute epoxies, they set too quick. Now this actually, you've got close to an hour of working time. I wouldn't say exactly that because it starts getting harder quicker, but it gives you enough time to work it on there and let it flow out. Now, what I have here, this apparatus, this is just a barbecue rotisserie. And what I do is, I just turn on, it turns slow. It allows me to put the diamond mixture on here, and it keeps it rotating so it just doesn't run, and then you have a place where it drips. It flows it out. Now on these ones, you'll notice that there's a piece of paper under here. When you're doing this, if you have old expandable drums like these 8-inch, I have some old ones, but these are actually not old ones. These are still good, usable, and I don't want to get a heavy grit on the edge of it and then end up my expandable drum's not usable because I've got this coarse grit on it, you know. So the easiest way to do that is cut some strips of paper, put them between your belt, and that way any extra gets on these piece of paper instead of your belt. Okay, we're going to go with the hardener first. And we're just going to use the entire tube in this project. In fact, because I know how much I gotta have, it looks like we're going to be a little shy for doing this. So I'm going to end up using 2 tubes to complete this project, or 2 sets. I'm going to need about 2 ounces. Now I do have a tutorial that I've made some years back, and I will go ahead and offer it in my store at oviesjewelry.com, but that's not going to be anything different than what's actually in this thing we do today. It's questionable. Maybe I don't know. We'll go ahead and do it. I have some belts that I have recoated. I haven't recoated in a while, but I have some belts. One that I did that was about 325 grit, and I've been running it for 3 years, and it still cuts better than 180 grit. wheel because it has more diamonds on it. I have an 8,000 grit that I've done, and well, we might want to do it this way. The 8,000 grit's been going the same amount of time, and it still does a wonderful job on polish. So if you're using them, I've used wheels or belts until they actually either I've done something to damage them and gouge them, or either actually the belt separates at the seam from age. So they'll last a long time. Sometimes it's easier not to have to mess with something, so you take a different route. Okay, now we're just going to take, same time we mix this, I'm going to put this 100 carats of diamonds in here. And like I say, this is way more than a lot of them recommend, but understand that if you do this right and you get these on there smooth, you end up with a really nice belt. You'll truly be happy with what you end up with. Now you need to mix this good, and like I say, you're on a time constraint, so make sure you realize this as you're doing this, so that you don't spend a whole long time mixing and then your mix get too hard and you can't put it on. Chances are you might get disgusted, and then you won't want to do this again. Yeah, I've tried looking at the store to find Lowe's and such, find a different epoxy, but it seems like everyone's in a hurry these days, so just about all the epoxies you find at Lowe's or Walmart are the 5 or 10 minute epoxies. They're real fast setting, and like I say, you have too short a work time, and you end up where your product doesn't flow out. Now this is mixed up good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start putting this on the wheel. And we'll move this just a little bit so we got a better angle. Now I'm going to start on these smaller ones first, because and all I'm going to do is I'm going to daub stuff on these wheels, go around and daub it on. And you want to make sure when you mix this that you mix your diamonds good, because you don't want them clumped up somewhere, because then you've got like a higher concentration, or maybe a place that might mess up your piece. And we're going to just kind of start spreading this out, and then we'll add more as we need to, but we're just going to go from one to the other. This is a slow process. If you need more somewhere, then just add it in as you go around, and we'll work these spots out. And we want to make sure we get all the way to the edge. For my situation, I do hearts with these, so I have to have a good edge, and that's normally when I wear out a belt, it's usually the edge. In fact, like I showed that first one, it ends up with some fraying, and then you end up where you can't actually get in the groove of a heart. So understand that if you don't use the edge, it's not quite so critical, but when you do, it needs to be there. I tend to use my Genie with the 6-inch wheels quite a bit more than I used to, because I don't actually run it with a full set of wheels. Normally I'm running just one wheel on one side, because when I start doing knife handles or something, it works a lot better. It gives me plenty of room for shaping them. But it's when you're working with stuff like that, like maybe some kind of carving, and you're trying to do it, and that's where I use the coarse wheels like this instead of using a hard one, because I'm working with so many curves and stuff like that that it just it's a whole lot easier that way. Just pay attention to your wheels, like I say, make sure they're coated good, and like I say, the equipment's not that much to do it, because once you get your rotisserie and you get you some kind of little support for it, and as long as you got a place to store it when it's not being used, it'll be around for a while. And in between here now, I use spacers. All my shafts are 1 inch, but every time you order a wheel, you end up with a adapter spacer with it, and I just hang on to them, and I'll use them, and then I'll put a washer there that keeps the wheel from moving. So it's got a washer on each side of it, and it's ideal for setting this up. And I don't recommend, when you do this, to take and go this way on your wheel. I mean, you can do that, but when you get finished, you want to go sideways, because then it tends to self-level a lot better. Yeah, actually, I haven't purchased any 60 grit belts for my 8-inch machine, because I don't have that much of a use for them on that, but I figured I would coat a couple while I was doing this. So, because sometimes certain material works better with a soft wheel, working it out. Larimore, I know I've always had a problem with it wanting to fracture, and because even though I don't use the 80 grit wheel, hard wheel, the 280 grit seems to be just enough pounding that it causes, if it has a weak place for it to show up and separate. So I normally end up going to my 6-inch machine. And I guess I should mention to make sure you use latex gloves, because you end up with this stuff on your fingers. I think it'd be kind of hard to wipe off, especially being it has diamonds. It would be a pretty rough job. And occasionally, one of your little brush pieces might come off in there. It's not any big deal, but I normally pick them out, because it could cause a situation where you have kind of a buildup of diamonds right in that place. So if you get it out, just get something and get it out. Now we'll go back and we'll touch up these others, make sure they're going. But as you can see, it's kind of starting to get shiny on and smooth on some of these, because it's, as it turns, it self levels, and that's the reason why we're using this rotisserie. If we were just to put it on, then it wouldn't level itself out. If you see places that you think might need more diamonds, just keep going, but because you want it to be covered good. With a coarse wheel like this, you're going to want to eat a lot of material when you're using it. So I wouldn't say it's be as critical if it is a little more in one place than another. But on when you start getting to your finer grits, especially, 1,200, 14,000, and even 50,000. You want it to end up nice and even. And just because you mixed up so much, and in my case, doing all these wheels, don't feel like you got to use up everything that you've got. It kind of takes a little bit of getting used to get it exactly down packed, but on the last set I had a little more mixture than what I needed. But that doesn't mean just because you have the extra put it on. You want to make sure that you're not putting too much on. Like I say, you want an even coat all the way around. When you get too much, you don't have that as much flex with your wheel, and if you don't have that flex, then you're going to end up getting closer to, it won't be exactly a hard wheel, but it's going to get closer to that type of situation. But you can see now why it's important to have the 220 instead of the 330, because if we had been using the 330, this would have been trying to set a long time ago. Now, I have tried to do this with hard wheels, and I find that no matter how good I clean it, or even if I use 330 to try to do it, I don't get a good strong bond. And of course, a lot of times on your hard wheels, you'll work on a raking surface on your stone to where you don't worry about it running that way. It's different from a belt. But when you coat your hard wheel, and you rake that surface of your stone, that sharp edge, it'll actually start digging off your diamond epoxy mix, and then once it starts that, it just all seems to come apart. So now after this sets and dries, a lot of times it'll kind of epoxy itself a little bit to your expandable drum. And of course, once we get this dried, we'll go back and show you how we deal with that. Okay, I still have a little bit of mixture left, I still have a little bit of mixture left, but there's no sense in using it. They're coated fairly good. Now what I'll do is let this turn, and it starts set up in about an hour. So if I let this turn a couple of hours, and then I'll just touch it somewhere, make sure it's just maybe tacky, but not too much. Then I'll just shut this off, and then we'll let it sit overnight. Okay, it's the next day. The belt's set overnight. This is one of them that's on there. It's nice and coated. Now, whenever you recoat one of these wheels, some of your diamonds will be exposed, but some of them won't. I usually take a hard agate and I run it on it kind of an angle to an edge, so I get a kind of a rake to it, but not to dig all the diamonds off. But I want to kind of maybe shave the soft epoxy, so I'll like round the edge, but I'll make sure it, like say, it's downward on the belt. This process now, when you start doing finer belts like 50,000 grit, I recommend that you use a little bit less carat wise on your diamond grit, because it tends to, I have in the past, I've wanted to have plenty on there, and it tends, because it's so fine, the epoxy doesn't mix between it, so it tends to clump more. So you want to be careful and really mix it up good when you're doing your finer belts. As far as if you like this video, go ahead and hit like. If you want to be notified whenever my next videos come out, as soon as they come out, just hit subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified. And I hope this is helpful. Like I say, it's not a hard process. It's relatively easy to do. It does take just a little bit of time and just a little bit of equipment, but it's not an expensive process, and it can save you a lot of money.